Tales of the Legion Project podcast, Legion of Superheroes Annual number 1. Everybody, welcome to the second Tales of the Legion Project podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Eric from longboxreview.com.
And I'm Peter from the Daily Rios.
Hello, Peter, and how is your free comic book day treating you?
It is free comic book day, and instead of being at a comic book shop, I thought, no, I'm going to talk Legion.
We're actually going to talk about a comic, not just go get some comics.
Right, but you're going to go to a shop after we record.
That is the plan, yes. We shall see.
Do you have a close store? I don't even know about I'm sure you've talked about it, but I don't remember.
I do. There's actually one in town that I've been a person who goes there in years past. I don't subscribe there. I know. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there going, why don't you support your local comic shop? Well, it's because issues. There were issues. So it's a fine shop, but I get my comics elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, there's the whole cost thing.
Right.
I'm a cheap bastard.
I had the local shop near me when I lived in South Philly, but then it closed. But my bulk of my buying was online, but then I would go there just to supplement. But now where I live, it's everything's a drive away. And I could get to a store, but I don't think I'm getting out. There's always something going on with me, work or whatever, especially because it's the end of the school year. So I usually miss out on Free Comic Book Day anyway.
Yeah, normally we in years past I've been taking my granddaughters, Maddie and Gabby, who live with us, to Free Comic Book Day, and they really enjoy that. But here in the recent last couple years, I guess, they're not always with us on that weekend. And so on those weekends, I tend to not even go. Plus, I don't know, the offerings for Free Comic Book Day, you can usually pick up other times, or they'll eventually release them online, like on Comixology for free. So, I don't need to go get those books. But, it's more about if you're going to go, then you should support your local shop by buying other things and not just, standing there getting free stuff.
Right. Yeah, a lot of the local stores around here, they have a lot of decent sales going on. And one of our stores, one of the longest stores in this area, was about ready to close because the owner was going to retire. And then they just happened to find a new owner. So it's going to stay in business, which is kind of nice.
Oh, yeah, that is nice.
Yeah.
So, Peter, what do you think of the likelihood of being able to find the Legion of Superheroes Annual number 1 in back issue bins on Free Comic Book Day?
I think it depends on your store. I know at conventions, the Baxter Run can be found frequently. I used to always come across the Baxter Run. And I think part of that is because it was such a popular seller back then. But I think you need to have a store that has a wide variety of back issues, probably.
Yeah.
But I have it. I still have my original copy, 1985.
I think my copy I got years later and I've talked about this before on the main Legion Project podcast episodes, where I was waiting for the reprints in the Tales book, and then down the road, some months later, I decided, I don't like the look of this, and decided to go back and get all of the Baxter issues, and I think this annual was one of those as well.
Right. Well, as Eric said, this is our second episode for the Tales of the Legion Project podcast. The first episode covered the Legion of Substitute Heroes special, which you can find both on Comixology and on the DC Universe app. However, doing a search, at least as of this morning, although both sites have all 63 issues of the Baxter Run, so now listeners have absolutely no excuse. They should be following along with us. We can cut them some slack because they don't have the annuals for some reason. And I don't know. I don't know if it's maybe listed somewhere else.
I can't imagine where, but yeah, it's weird, isn't it, that they don't have that?
When you look at the 5 years later run, when you look at the Legion run prior to the Baxter run, those annuals are right up top when you search, because it'll go issue 1, annual 1, issue 2, annual 2, so they're kind of right there at the top.
Oh, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but these, for some reason, whether it has anything to do with the files or, I don't know, royalties or whatever, but I can't imagine that. None of these annuals are on there, so we apologize about that. So if you are playing the home game and following with us and you don't have this issue, you're just going to have to listen and try to find it somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to the annual right away, and then we'll save feedback from the first issue at the end of the episode, where all good letter columns are usually found.
Okay.
That way we can, jump right in.
Get right into it, yeah.
Yeah. Same format for those people who've never heard a Tales episode before as our regular podcast. We're going to give a synopsis. We're going to talk about the issue and see where the discussion goes.
All right. So, as we said, Legion of Superheroes Annual Number 1, revenge is a dish best served cold, although on the cover it says, more appropriately, Who Shot Laurel Kent? This is by Paul Levitz, Keith Giffen, and Carl Kessel. Joining Keith Giffen, though, on this, a bunch of different inkers, like I said, Carl Kessel, Mike DiCarlo, Ernie Colon, Steve Mitchell, Larry Malstead, John Costanza on letters, Carl Gafford is our colorist, Karen Berger is the editor, with a cover by Giffen and Kessel. So what happens in this issue? A lot. While most of the Legionnaires, it starts off with, most of the Legionnaires are helping the Science Police with prisoners on Takron Galtos. Brainiac 5, Colossal Boy, Magnetic Kid, Shrinking Violet, and Chameleon Boy are left to watch the Legion board, or should I say B-board. Colossal Boy wants to watch The Colonizers. I guess that's a 30th century soap opera. Violet and Cam are playing cards, and Magnetic Kid is, I guess, hovering around everybody. Violet contends that there must be something better they could be doing after she wins back some credits from that Durlan snake that's beating her, as she says. And Brainy agrees, asking if there are any cases at all on which they could focus their attention. Chameleon Boy urges Magnetic Kid to choose, because he's there and new, I guess, and Paul chooses the burning subplot of the last year, Who Tried to Kill Laurel Kent? Colossal Boy and Magnetic Kid interrogate Laurel, but she doesn't much like their approach and storms out. That doesn't stop them, however, as they tail Laurel in disguise as she strolls through the shopping district. And it's a good thing they did, because Magnetic Kid spies someone else tailing her. That said person rushes toward her and Colossal Boy grabs him, only it's not an attacker. It's Science Police Officer Devron, who has been working on solving the case, or at least playing bodyguard. Laurel's had enough and tells everyone involved to mind their own business, which may or may not have implications down the road. Later, Colossal Boy, Magnetic Kid, and Devron discuss the case, and Colossal Boy decides a trip to Thanagar is in order. Once there, Colossal Boy, Magnetic Kid, and Chameleon Boy are shown a holotape of the gun that was used to fire the kryptonite bullet that struck Laurel. Anyway, they see this holotape. It's being stolen along with the murder of 2 Thanagarian Hawk Police, but only 2. Meanwhile, on Wynath, Violet investigates the murder scene of the private investigator who was tailing Ayla before. This is in a previous issue, and almost ends up dead herself. Back on Earth, Brainiac shows off just how smart he is by preventing the next murder, namely the Legion tour bus operator Ollie Queen. First seen in... I'll get back to that. I'll come back to that. Brainy then sends Cam and Vi to watch over the next set of future victims on the killer's list, which are Flash descendants Dawn and Dawn Allen, the Tornado Twins. A robot attacks, but Vi removes the Allens from the scene and the robot escapes, giving Cam a clue to the whereabouts of the murderer. And finally, the Legionnaires converge at the North Pole, defeat the robot, and learn from Brainy that the assailant is a former JLA antagonist who awakens a few times a year to enact his revenge on his enemy's descendants. That's a mouthful.
Yeah. This has been a subplot in this volume for quite a while. I just wanted to give a little bit of a backdrop to what you just went through in that synopsis for anybody who maybe hasn't been reading, or you have and maybe you missed a couple things. As you mentioned, we go all the way back to issue 1 of the Baxter series, to the scene that introduced Ayla, or Light Lass at that time, back into the Legion of Superheroes, because Timberwolf had hired a detective. So we saw him in issue 1, and all we really got was that he smoked a cigarette. He was he was trying to discover where Ayla was. He did have on his door 2 initials, M.W., Private Investigations. And then we got a little bit of some history or some... We got an idea that private investigators in the 30th century are rare. So that was his connection. We saw him next in issue 7. This is where we find out that private investigators are rare. And it was 2 science police had come upon his body, and he was stabbed. He was dead. We didn't know why. And the only information we found out is that he was the descendant of the Batman. If we go to issue, let's see, number 8, that's when Laurel was shot. When she was hanging out at the Legion Academy, she was shot by a kryptonite bullet, which we would find that out in issue 9. And that's when we learned that the science police officer known as Devron was on the case. And then in issue 12, we saw her again. She had a wrap around her. She had a brace. And that leads us, at least in terms of that subplot, all the way to the annual that we're talking about today, which is in publishing chronology, released between issues 15 and 16 of the main series.
Mm-hmm.
So not quite a year, right? I always like when annuals come right after issue 12, but whatever. Yeah. It's my little OCD. Mm-hmm. It's like, ugh. So that's been the subplot that's been building to this issue. And then it finally blows up, as you say, into this sprawling story. Should we talk first, though, about the covers? Because there are 2 covers, just like in the series. We have Legion of Superheroes Annual 1, but then we have Tales of the Legion of Superheroes Annual number 4, a year later by Steve Lytle. What were your thoughts on the covers?
Well, I kind of went back and forth on these. A Steve Lytle cover is always nice, especially when you got the characters kind of coming out at you. Of course, we see that a lot, actually, now that I think about it. It says, though, on the cover, "In the shadows of the night, a killer's on a rampage, and he's out for Legion blood," which I thought was kind of misleading. But it's kind of neat. The characters are emerging out of a shadow figure that's behind them. So, it looks kind of neat. But the main cover is the Who Shot Laurel Kent, big question mark on there. I actually, despite the simplicity, of this, maybe overly simple nature of the composition of this cover. I like this one better, Peter. You got the 4 main Legionnaires on the cover here. Their faces are half in shadow, kind of evoking a bit of a maybe even a noir aspect to this, and I'll talk about that some more later as we get into the issue. And then you got Laurel there in the middle, kind of laying there like, maybe as or evoking when she was shot, and you got the kryptonite bullet nearby, and she's kind of filling in the question mark in that way. I don't know. It's really simple, black background, but it's Giffen, so I guess maybe that's why I'm liking it. I don't know. What about you?
I agree. I kind of like this one too. The Tales cover, the blurb, as you said, sort of is a little misleading. The Tales cover, even though it's by Steve Lytle, every time I look at it, if I kind of just quickly look at it, it looks very Curt Swan-like.
Oh, yeah.
Like that would be a cover design that Curt Swan would do. So there's something comfortable about that other cover, the Tales cover. It reminds me a little bit of the Legion of Superheroes annual number 3 from the regular series, which was the Curse issue. And there was all kinds of stuff about people climbing out of shadows and darkness, and just it feels like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's good. I think it's good. I think this one is the more striking of the two, and even to the point of when I create the little podcast images for our episodes, the little episode images, and then I layer a title over it. I kind of want to go with the Who Shot Laurel Kent title, not the Revenge is Best, because that's just too many words in that title.
Yes. Well, yeah, that was kind of one of my complaints too, as well. I get the Revenge is a dish best served cold, but the whole thing is Who Shot Laurel Kent. Why not just go with that? Is it just too much? Because they have it on the cover. It's a question that's been asked by us readers, us fans, since issue number 8. I don't know. It seemed odd to me that they would go with something other as well.
Is it just because of the whole Who Shot JR? Is it too close?
See, that's
to
what I was
the
wondering.
Dallas
Yeah,
connection?
But that was 5 years earlier.
True.
So I don't know. Maybe that's what I thought. But it just seemed weird that they would approach it that way. Or let that popular culture touchstone, Who Shot JR, be somehow, or having to ignore that, I guess. But they don't. That's the problem. Is that it's right on the cover.
Is that
weird.
Is that what the Colonizers TV show is supposed to be? Do you think a riff on?
Oh,
I thought it was a riff on like Dynasty, the name Dynasty, but
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe that is also a riff on Dallas. Maybe that scene is mimicking.
Yeah. I'll have to take a closer look at those brief instances in which we see a scene from that show, just to see if there's anything to that. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
And even if it's not, we'll just go with it.
Right. How about some overall thoughts here? Some overall general thoughts of the annual itself. What do you have?
I really like this story. I like this issue, I should say, because I can't say story. I really enjoyed the different takes of, or different. What do I want to say here? The different styles of storytelling in each of the chapters. I really enjoyed. We got different inkers doing this, and so we get a different look for each one. I like how they tried to mimic certain detective stories. What am I trying to say?
Almost like voices, detective, or tone, or...
Yeah. They're evoking certain tropes. That's the word I'm looking for. Detective story tropes. And I really enjoyed that. Now, the story itself, not as strong as the presentation.
I can see that. I think this issue as I was rereading it after, I don't think I've read this. I think the first time I read it was in the 80s, and that was the last time I read this issue. Um, the tone of it was slightly similar to the Substitute Special.
Mm-hmm.
I have to imagine that's Giffen's flavor coming into it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't self-referential. It wasn't absurdist like the sub special was. It didn't make me as a reader go, the creators know they're writing a comic book or creating a comic book. There weren't sight gags, there weren't letters, there weren't visual jokes, not in the way that the sub special was.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciated the tone, that sort of lightness, and especially because it is a standalone issue. It's outside of the main series. I feel like this is a good example of how you can use the Legion of Superheroes in a different way to tell a different kind of story. Because, a murder mystery, quote unquote, is sort of mundane for the Legion, at least in the way I thought they presented it here.
Mm-hmm.
They're so usually caught up in the whole sci-fi, space opera, future utopia stuff. And this one didn't necessarily rely on Legion technology and Legion, just sort of like the standard Legion approach. It really was, at the very least, sort of like deductive reasoning, using the different settings, the different subplots, the different supporting characters that have been in the Legion here and there, to varying levels of success, I think. So I enjoyed it. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as you did, but I did enjoy it because it was a little unexpected, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is different. To touch on what you just said, I really responded to not only just what we get on the page and the story itself, generally speaking, art-wise, but just that experimentation that they're doing a little bit here. Like you said, putting the characters into a situation or a story beat that's not normal for them.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, I'm assuming this is mostly Giffen in this case, but Giffen's take on and visual representation of those takes, along with a little bit of that humor that you mentioned. So it's kind of like it's a Legion murder mystery, but a bit of sitcom-y type humor rolled in as well, which doesn't always work, but it's interesting that they're trying.
Almost buddy cop.
Yeah. Well, yeah. They're one of the chapters is exactly a buddy cop take,
right?
And then but then on top of that, they do a little bit of offhanded humor type stuff, I guess, to offset the more dark elements of the story. The actual attempted murders and whatnot. I suppose, and that's where things kind of break down for me in terms of that. But I appreciate that Giffen and company are playing around with the format, playing around with the characters, and trying different things. Why? One of the questions I had about this annual is, why do this story for an annual? Like you said, it's kind of a mundane situation for the Legion, generally speaking. But the more I think about it, it's like, well, this is a perfect opportunity for them to explore these different aspects of the Legion, to see how we can stretch the concepts and manipulate them and see what avenues they can go down, and more or less succeed, I think, in this annual.
Right. Plus, it's a larger format. They can take their time. They can really hit on all those chapters. I'm not super well versed in noir or mystery novels. So outside of the Shrinking Violet chapter, where she's just narrating in that very noir style, if the other chapters had anything that was evocative of other kind of mystery stories. It kind of went over my head a little bit. So maybe that's another reason why it was attractive to you, because you probably recognize more than I do in terms of what it was they were trying to hit on, right? Like, because that's the Shrinking Violet one is clearly the hey, a dame walks into my office and she says, that kind of thing. Yeah, she's talking about her eyes and all this other stuff. So
kind of. I'm not well versed on detective fiction, but I might be even saying the wrong character, but I'm thinking Raymond Chandler like type stuff. Mm-hmm. Just that hard-boiled detective narration kind of thing that was really cool in chapter 4.
Right. The closest thing I can come up with is what did Patrick Stewart play? Or Picard, he played Dixon Hill or whatever.
Dixon Hill, yes. Yeah. No, that's similar, just without the noir aspects, yeah.
Right. Well, what did you feel? What did you get a sense from the other chapters?
Let's see. So as we get into chapter 2, that's where Colossal Boy and Magnetic Kid are tailing Laurel. That to me, that's the buddy cop thing. That's the any private investigator procedural type situation you get. Chapter 3 is a bit more of that, but also with a bit of Sherlockian elements with Chameleon Boy.
Right. I mean, he gives it away, right? He says elementary. How did I not see that? Right.
Yeah. And there's another thing I'll get to that when we get to that section. There's another element of that I was going to point out.
Okay.
And then you get we already talked about Vi's chapter, but then at the end there, towards the end there, Brainy is Sherlock Holmes. He's the guy that the super smart guy in the room who then tells everybody or shows how stupid everybody else is because he's figured it out 10 years ago, and he's just now letting us know, hey, by the way, I solved this.
Right.
But then, do you want to talk about the payoff to this, or shall we build up to it as we discuss the chapters?
Yeah, let's build up to because I have some separate thoughts on that. Is there any detective fiction that is ensemble based? Outside of Scooby Doo.
Well, I didn't even think about that. That's good.
I'm trying to think of, because I was wondering if that was the Brainy chapter 2. Is there anything that he has as cohorts? And because it felt there was sort of like a bumbling nature, in that aspect, in that chapter.
Well, so I took that more as Brainy as Sherlock Holmes, and the rest of them are his Watsons
and inspectors and all that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I like that, and you feel like it succeeded, right? You sort of got all that stuff.
I think so. I was reading some reactions in some letter columns and some other stuff online, and turns out a lot of people weren't a big fan of this issue.
Oh,
primarily for the attempt at doing exactly what I think is the strength of the issue, which is all these different styles and trope examinations and whatnot. So, to each their own, I guess.
I think this was, we're covering this issue 30 some years later, right? And we've gone through the Bwahaha era, and we've gone through we've gone through Matter Eater Lad in the 5 years later Legion. We've gone through humorous takes. And maybe I think the readers at the time, they already were bucking up against Giffen's art changes. Yeah. So I wonder if they it just was too different. See, I can't remember as a kid if it was, because again, I was 12, 13 years old. I would absolutely love, like we said with the substitute issues, I loved that issue because I was a kid. But maybe slightly older readers, this slow build into a Legion that instead of just one-off jokes here and there, where the whole issue is kind of humorous, not jokey. This one isn't jokey. I think it's just humorous.
Yeah.
And there will be other instances like that in the later Baxter run that go a little deeper, they push a little more and a little more. So I didn't get a chance to read reactions. I don't think I forgot about that part of this podcast. But I wonder if readers at the time were just being a little too bound and a little too protective of the Legion concept. What do you think about that?
I think that's accurate, and you're right. Some of the comments that I read, they specifically called out Giffen's change in style as not being favorable of it.
Yeah,
and I could certainly understand that, because I had a similar reaction when I was reading this. I mean, I didn't read this annual back then, but as he was evolving his style for the stuff that I did read back then, I didn't like it at first either. So I totally get that reaction to it. But 30 some years later, I'm more than happy to love what he's giving us here.
Yeah, I remember at the time reading the Ambush Bug miniseries, which I'm pretty sure had already come out by this point.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were getting ready to do the second one, so you can't get zanier at that time, unless you're going to like Boris the Bear or something, But I mean, that book was insane. So I guess his humor obviously has always worked on me. I'm a huge Giffen fan, I used to read all those wacky miniseries, Video Jack and March Hare, the weirder concepts outside of DC and Marvel, He did a great book in the 90s, I think, called Punks, this short-lived series called Punks that was just so good. So younger me really liked his stuff. Older me continues to like his stuff. So, and there's some stuff in this as we sort of dig a little deeper, there's stuff in here that really connects to the larger Legion universe that, as I was reading, I was like, see, this gives an in-story anchor, or it gives a reason for why all this fun, silly stuff that they've been doing for a long time, it kind of makes sense now, and it gives it a validity almost. So, so I like this issue a lot. I don't want anybody to think I don't like it, but it just was unexpected this time around. Mm-hmm. So it's good. That's good. We both are, have ideas about this issue. So there's a couple of things that we can talk about. First of all, Magnetic Kid as kind of like our, I don't know if you can call him everyman character, but like sort of our into the story. Mm-hmm. Then you have the specific Legionnaires that were chosen. And then, as you mentioned earlier, the outcome of this subplot. So what did you have on any of like Magnetic Kid or the Legion that was used?
I don't know that I have a whole lot to say about that, other than it seems like, I think as we've been talking about Magnetic Kid since his induction into the Legion a few issues back, we're wondering, why, and what are they doing with him? And I almost, this is kind of meta, but I kind of think of Paul Levitz going, I think I need to do something with this kid, and so we'll stick him in the story. And give him a little bit more to do, because there's not much to him in terms of his personality, in comparison to his brother. So he's got to be different from his brother, but we just haven't had enough of him. So I think in that regard, he is kind of like the everyman, like you mentioned. He's our way into the story. And he's the total novice, not only as a Legionnaire, but also as a Legionnaire who's involved in a case. Mm-hmm. It just happens to be an attempted murder case on a colleague, a friend.
Right.
And they totally bypass that aspect of it, because he had, we presume, had a relationship with Laurel, being in the academy together, and yet he doesn't seem to have any kind of emotional reaction to the event whatsoever. And the way that he approaches choosing it, I guess maybe it's because of that. I'm totally bringing in elements into the story that are not, I don't think, there, but just so that my brain makes those connections. Maybe that's why he chose this case, is because of that connection. But he doesn't. The way he does it is like, Cam is shoving him towards the board to choose something, and he's like, "Okay, as long as you asked, who tried to kill Laurel?" And it just, I don't know. It's just the way it's presented doesn't seem to have any kind of resonance with him, other than here's something we can do. I like the use of Colossal Boy, because I forget now, Peter, was he a science police officer, or was he in training to be one before he became a Legionnaire?
I think in training. This is where my fuzzy Legion history, comes to the forefront. But yeah, I think he was training.
Yeah, I think I recall that as well. But it's nice to see him taking on that role again, but in a very different way, because he's totally dismissive of Devron and the Legion, of course, itself in this issue, and in many others, but in this issue it's pretty evident too. They don't think a whole lot of the science police.
Right. It goes back to that Legion elitism that I've been talking about.
Yes,
that one scene, or just Chameleon Boy's, his sort of candor, is sort of how he treats the one science police officer on Thanagar. So sort of kind of brushing him off, giving him a little tidbits here and there, but not really bringing him into the scene. There was a lot of that going on in this issue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then you've got, since speaking about Chameleon Boy, you got him, being the leader of the espionage squad.
Mm-hmm.
He seems like and he's investigated other things before in past Legion stories, so he's an obvious choice for the detective in here. And then you got Brainy, as I said, as the Sherlock Holmes character. He's very much the armchair detective, so to speak, in this story. I guess Vi is really the only oddball in this. Not quite sure why they would choose her, other than her attitude we've been seeing.
Wasn't she a member of the espionage squad as well?
No, you're right. No, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I guess it's just the focus that she gets, because she gets a solo chapter in this, and it's so evocative of, like I said, the noir detective style.
Yeah.
That it's I don't know, it just comes across very strong and different. So I'm just trying to understand why Vi. But like I said, I think it has more to do with how she has been portrayed recently. She's a bit aggressive. That's the word I was looking for. She's been shown as a bit aggressive with her teammates, and just with situations. And maybe I'm conflating some things and making more out of it than it needs to be. But it makes sense to have her in that role in the chapter that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, she seems a bit of an oddball to include on the surface anyway.
I think they love this character. I think Paul Lovitz loves what he's done with Shrinking Violet.
Oh yeah.
So I feel like any chance he could give her any kind of spotlight, he's going to do that. If she was a member of the espionage squad, she was a different kind of member before. And now she can be. I like what she says in that one panel. I had learned to respect the kind of intuition you only get the hard way. And, I can see that kind of being a little bit of detective fiction prose, but it is relatable to her story. And if she was a member of the squad alongside Chameleon Boy, maybe she's learned something along the way, and now she's able to be just a little, like you said, a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more on the offensive than the defensive.
I think that's become a defining aspect of her character now.
Yeah. So I like that. I like the espionage squad whenever they come into play, even though it's not really what's going on here, but sort of. And what you said about Magnetic Kid is so true. I wrote down here, first of all, he gets to shine a little bit. even if it's not in the most generous light. He's clumsier. He's a less sure version of Cosmic Boy. He's young, which the Legion has been missing.
Mm-hmm.
I think even Shrinking Violet in this issue, she says something about being too old for something, you know. So even though they got new recruits, even as far back as, say, Dawnstar or White Witch, they didn't feel... Well, maybe I shouldn't say this because I haven't read those early stories with them, but I don't get the sense that they were young. Maybe, like you said, novices, but Magnetic Kid, he's young. He feels young. He looks young. It's been a long time since the Legion has been full of just under 18-year-old teenagers, right? Like that was the whole thing. You couldn't be 18 and become a Legion of Superheroes member. So he feels like, you know, he feels like what they used to feel like back in those, you know, adventure comic days.
Yeah.
So I kind of like that. And every time he's on panel, he almost stands out a little bit. I still don't like him. It's not like a... But he stands out a little bit because he's like the newbie, and he's so Silver Age newbie, and he's so... It's like bringing the young Cosmic Boy back again. And you're right. He kind of just stands there and watches as they work through this thing. And then he gets to save the day at the end because ultimately that's what you do in this kind of story. So I get that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So on that level, it kind of all worked for me. You know, I thought the characters were right. They all played to their strengths, more or less. They're in character. Maybe some of it had to do with Giffen. Maybe he's like, look, all right, I'll do that issue, but I got to have certain characters, you know. I don't want the rejects. I'm sure there's other stuff here and there, but do we actually want to talk about... Well, wait, we got to talk about this first. So I skipped over the other quote-unquote main character, but that of Laurel Kent. I think part of my that unexpected disappointment was that she's not really focused. She's not used in this story.
Yeah, she's a supporting character.
Yes,
in a story about her own attempted murder.
Yeah, like even cameo. I don't even know if I would go supporting, like whatever that third tier is, you know, like secondary supporting it. That felt like I was gypped a little bit because I really like her character. I don't know why. I think it's just because of the historical connection. Some of it is her design. The simplicity of that red cape, you know, is kind of fun. But they kind of brush her off too. And she's not part of the investigation. I don't know, you know, and she's, so in story, she's going to leave the academy because she didn't get selected to be a Legion of Superheroes member. You know, part of me was, in my head canon, I was like, well, that's why the Legion, they aren't paying attention to her because they couldn't, you know, she didn't make the team. So they're kind of brushing her off, but I know that's not in story. That's the part that I missed. I was hoping there was more of Laurel Kent.
Well, there is, and I totally agree with you, but I guess they tried to address that somewhat as we get into, it's on page 4, where Colossal Boy is talking to her or interrogating her. There's a panel where she's saying, you know, I appreciate that, Colossal Boy, but I don't understand why it's my problem. But then we get a few panels here that are done in just a monochrome green way. You know, she's remembering being shot. And so what she's saying is belying what she's feeling. And so, you know, to me it suggested that it was too much for her to handle to be directly involved in solving her own attempted murder case.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, then she just gets petulant to get them out of her way, to get them away from her, so she doesn't have to relive it. So maybe there's a bit of PTSD going on here. They just don't want to address it more than that.
And that comes up again when she's just walking along, and that person just comes in and shoves that perfume spray in her face, and we get those same kind of, they're not flashbacks, but they're almost like momentary, not attacks, but visual sort of like stimuli, triggers maybe,
Yeah.
where the tentacle is reaching up with the spray thing, and I wonder if that, I assume, like you said, that's another bit of that, where even though she then brushes it off and says, look, it was just some guy, but maybe it did affect her. Maybe it is something still in the back of her mind that, hey, she got shot once. She could be a target again.
But it's odd though that she goes out and is in such a public place. Then you think perhaps she would be more of a shut-in, given that situation. But it's hard to say how people react to things like this. Traumatic experiences,
and especially someone whose power is invulnerability.
Exactly. Yeah. See, that's where the 30 years later me reader type thing. That's the story that I want to read.
Right.
Is how since at the time that we're recording this, DC has Heroes in Crisis going on, that miniseries by Tom King and Clay Mann and others, where they are specifically discussing or examining how heroes deal with traumatic experiences for being those superheroes. And this would be perfect for that, other than the fact that this is the 30th century and it's 30 some years later.
Right.
but I would like that story. It seems like something really meaty that they could get into.
Yeah.
Down the road, if they wanted to re-examine that, they could have, continue Laurel's story, but they go a very different way with her down the road. I know.
Right. Yeah. So I just wanted to address that because she is, like I said, I do like her character. I like what they do years later with a version of her character. I love that, design-wise, she makes sense. She's half naked. She walks barefoot, but she's invulnerable. Who cares, right? Like, I just feel like there's some interesting things there with that. So then, again, to sort of hit larger points before there's anything, if we want to dig into some of the other stuff, the outcome, once we finally learn, is it too early to talk about the outcome? Is there other things we should go to first? No,
let's go ahead.
Okay. So we find out who it is. I mean, first of all, we get this robot that seems to be going after all the various characters that are targets. Brainy figures this out before everybody else, as you said, but I liked that Chameleon Boy, as Brainy talks, starts to put the pieces together himself, as he should, being the other detective.
Mm-hmm.
And they come upon the whole thing at the end, that this is a 1,000-year mystery, that someone is taking their revenge on the descendants of the Justice League of America. And that's something that we probably could have inferred from some of the subplots previous to this annual, but it's, being stated here fully. Not to mention the robot has the emblems of the different superheroes. He has a Superman emblem on his chest. He has a Hawkman emblem, which is crossed out. He has a Batman emblem, which is crossed out. And then he has a Flash emblem, Green Arrow. Strangely enough, he has a Green Lantern emblem.
I was going to ask you about that.
And that one's crossed out too, right?
Yes.
The only thing I can think, it's been established in Legion of Superhero continuity that the Green Lanterns aren't part of this sector of the universe. They're rare to be seen. I don't know. Did they run out of story and or maybe they just did that as kind of like, we'll just throw that in as a nod, to say there's still one more out there that, we didn't really get to, but that's okay. We just want to we want to see the scope of the targets.
So, but I find, I find that all this very interesting specifically that it's those Justice League members that, oddly, weirdly, the robot has their icons on his chest plate. I don't get that at all. But it's a nice quick visual. Hey, by the way, I've killed these guys, and there's some others on my list. But so Brainy, do you want to get into specifics of this?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Right now, okay. So Brainiac says, back in 1986 or so, if history's accurate, he fought the Justice League with robots 1,000 years ago, and so I was like, okay, 1986. So what Justice League issues were on the stand in 1986, about the same time period, because I was looking for some sort of connection there, some sort of synergy, publishing synergy, perhaps, it's to see if this was intentional. And so what you find out, well, okay, let me back up. I should have led with this. So we actually don't find out, I should say. It's never explicitly said in this issue who it is, who the character is. It's only implied by what I said, Brainiac 5 said. And so I was looking this up, and I figured that it was this character, but because it wasn't explicitly said, I wanted to do a little bit of investigating. To see if I was right, and so I'm looking up this issue, and like Comic Book DB and some other websites out there that catalog this information issue by issue for comics, and they all say it's Professor Ivo, the creator of Amazo, and I'm like, okay, but where does that come from? And so, like I said, Brainiac says 1986 or so. So it's obviously Justice League descendants. We've been told that already. So I went back and looked, and Professor Ivo did fight the Justice League in 1986. He appeared in Justice League of America issue 258, which was on sale in October '86, through issue 261, which was on sale January '87. And he appeared in one panel in Legends #2, which was on sale in September 1986, saying he was going to get his revenge on the Justice League. But 258, Peter, wasn't that the time of the Detroit era Justice League? Mm-hmm. So,
go ahead. We'll finish your thought.
No, it's just odd that he's taking his revenge on Justice League members that weren't part of the Justice League at the time that Brainiac 5 is referencing.
And this issue came out, though, in July or August of 1985.
Right.
So he missed by 1 year, but I don't know. Maybe the creators didn't know when this was going to come out, and just just put that in there.
Well, I kind of wondered, was that back in 1986 or so comment, did they add that, last minute as they went to publication for this issue, just to, like I said, make some sort of publishing connection there with some other books.
Yeah, because we're still in crisis mode by this time. We haven't gotten to Legends yet.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. Yeah. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah. But I think it's right though. They can certainly just extrapolate that. You can say, oh, we think so. You're right. Ivo was the reason why the Detroit era came to an end.
Yes.
And I was looking at that too. I was like, okay, why are they saying Ivo and not Tio Maro? The Legion says it could be anybody. There was a bunch of people that dealt with robots. But then Chameleon Boy very specifically says, he feels that the League denied him immortality. And that's a very Ivo thing. He drank a serum because he wanted to be immortal. It turned him into a monster. That's more his shtick than Tio Maro. Or it could just be a new character that never gets play, So I think the writers probably left it open to let it be whoever the readers want it to be, but I can see why people would pick Ivo over others.
Yeah, and so I referenced the like Comic Book DB and other websites, specifically identifying Ivo, and so
Mhm.
that fascinates me a little bit too, because why would they do that? When I agree, I think Paul or Keith left this open ended for a reason. I mean, there's even that panel there, the fourth panel on page 39, where we see I think we're looking at the cryo chamber that Ivo or whoever is in there, and we see this yellow band across it. And my first thought was, wasn't that? I would assume that's where the name would have gone, so that we as readers reading this mystery story would the killer would be revealed, and we kind of got that, I guess. But it was just an odd omission, I guess, for the end of a murder mystery story.
Yeah, I could see. Yeah, that was also another thing at the end where you're like, come on, just tell us who it is.
Yeah. Why are they being so coy about it? But I think you're right. I think they did this story maybe well in advance, and just fitted into the slot for the annual for whatever reason, and they didn't want to tie themselves down to anything specific. I don't know. It's a very strange issue in that regard.
Plus, you could always say, again, this is part of Legion lore, that late 20th century, early 21st century history is fuzzy for them because, they used to say because of the wars, but you could say because of crisis. It doesn't make much sense because, they certainly had a lot of knowledge of Superboy's time, but I guess that was one way to make sure that creators didn't maybe get themselves into a knot, is just say, look, they're the future. They don't exactly know what's going on during the heroic age. They can go visit it and find out, but the records are kind of shoddy. So, and maybe this is kind of an element of that.
So, Peter, since we're discussing the past with the Justice League stuff, I had this morning before we were going to record, I put out a thing on Twitter asking for some feedback about this issue for people who wanted to participate. And I had a comment here, or a question here, from Adam Thanos Pod on Twitter, does the Warlock Thanos podcast. Do you wish they ever had done more with descendants, legacies of 20th century characters, even immortal ones, or in the Legion, or do you prefer them leaving those characters to history?
I like when the Legion occasionally dips backwards.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and there's the long-standing Legion concept that the Martian Manhunter is around during this time because he was at somebody's wedding.
That's right. It was Lightning Lad and was it?
Oh
yeah, you're right. It is. It's Bouncing Boy and Trip and Duo Damsel's wedding.
Yeah. I never read the Saturn Girl Lightning Lad wedding, so he might be there. I just haven't read it. So he's around. We see him during the 5 years later run, which is great. Certainly the Amethyst concept is going to get roped into all of this eventually. That's not League related, but it's close. So we had Laurel Kent. We have the Tornado Twins. They even get pushed deeper into Flash concept or Flash history later, which I love those characters. That's the other thing. We even talked about the Tornado Twins if they were going to appear in this issue, and they do, but they don't do anything. And I was disappointed in that too.
Yeah. In fact, they were the exact opposite of what their powers imply. They're just sitting there.
Yeah.
It's like they don't have the Speed Force; they have the Still Force.
That was disappointing. So no, I do like when they do that. I think later versions of the Legion, especially after Zero Hour, went a little overboard in that kind of connection. And And then it would work the opposite way once you got to Legion, Legion, the acronym, where
Oh, of course, yeah.
suddenly they were mining the hell out of the 30th century. They were working backwards. So I do like it. I don't need it to be forefront. There's something there is something kind of interesting about that. The thing that I really like about this issue is that it validates all those little Easter eggs that we used to see. So Giffen was really, that was something that he liked to do, especially in like the late 200s, early 300s, right? You would see a random Thanagarian, like that would look like, the old Hawkman. We saw Ollie Queen, this tourist, that was probably just a joke, because if you didn't read the Interlac, you don't know what his name is. If you didn't take the time to go, well, what the hell does that mean? But, he certainly looks like Ollie Queen. So instead of it just being a quote unquote joke, it's now a story point that, yes, it's obvious that he is, but it's also obvious that they were doing that as kind of like, hey, let's be fun and silly. But now they're like, no, he has a reason. There is a reason. He is part of this universe. Laurel Kent is obvious. The private detective is obvious, because he was created for this story. But the Hawkman thing was the one that I was kind of like, oh, you see Hawkman all over the place. I don't know if there's ever been a Legion story with Thanagar before this. I used to always treat it like an Easter egg. It kind of makes sense that they would be around. But now we get this like real definitive thing that Thanagar is almost a place. It's like a museum for police. And that's what the Thanagarians were. The Hawk people were. They used to call them the Hawk Police. So yeah. I really liked that it's kind of like an in-story thing now. So that's the part of it that I liked relating to this story.
Yeah, and just to further that, those ideas about these subplot things, Ollie Queen, for example. I went back and I may have missed some of these things, but I think the last time we saw him was in Tales of the Legion of Superheroes number 320. Mm-hmm. He just appears in a panel. And then, but I first remember him in Legion of Superheroes number 290, which was the first chapter of the Great Darkness Saga. Mm-hmm. And unlike the appearance that you talked about, where if you don't read the Interlac, you missed it. His tour bus is written in clear English letters, Ollie Queen tour bus or tour something, whatever, but. But in that, he's making some comment to one of his tourists that he's driving around the Legion headquarters, and saying something about, or referring to them as an idiot, and it's kind of ominous. It's almost like he was being set up to be a part of the antagonist of that story, of the Great Darkness Saga, and then it would just kind of dropped. And then we see him, many issues later, and he becomes this subplot in what culminates in this issue, in this annual. And you have, as you said, Laurel Kent being the descendant of Superman. Did you ever read her first appearance?
I did not. I think I skimmed through it once I found out where it was. I have that issue, and I just skimmed through it. I didn't read it, though.
Okay, yeah, it's a bit weird. This is from Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes number 217. This is back in 1976 that she first appeared, and boy, that's a weird story. People should go read that. For being a descendant of Superboy at that time, there's a weird connection going on between the two characters, and I'll just leave it at that. But she only had, between that issue and this annual, she only had 8 appearances. So there's not a whole lot of her in Legion comics. And yet this has been percolating, more or less within the timeline since that 1976 issue. And so that that aspect with with Ollie Queen and the Tornado Twins, in comparison, they only appeared twice before this issue, at least that I could find, in Superboy 200 and Adventure Comics number 373. That was in 1968, and Superboy was 1974. So I love how Levitz and Giffen and others are bringing in these characters. Every once in a while we'll touch on these very minor characters, or even ongoing supporting characters like Laurel, to culminate in something like this. Now, we can agree or disagree about the quality of the story, but at least we get that lovely universe building and fleshing out of the universe, and it's like we're living in the universe because there's all these little touchstones of things that happen in the past. I love that aspect of this issue.
No, I agree. I think as we're finding in this, how many episodes we've done, Paul Levitz is smart.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels kind of dumb to say, but he's smart. He knows his history. It's like Claremont on the X-Men or Wolfman on Titans. I mean, they know the backstory, even the stuff that they didn't write themselves. And they're mining it in an interesting way for quote unquote modern stories, modern as of the 80s, and it certainly culminates once Giffen returns, and then the 5 years later, and it's everything why I don't like the 0 Hour reboot of the Legion, because it just feels backwards. It's why I want a new Legion book to not be about these characters. I want them to jump ahead and play on the history, but
yeah,
we know where that's headed.
They needed a next generation that stuff.
We really do. Really do.
Yeah, but I think you're right. We're not going to get that.
Yeah. Can we talk about the art and specifically the inking, the different inking styles? I'll just start. I really liked the Steve Mitchell stuff. Which chapter was that? I wrote it in my notes. I don't remember which chapter it was.
4.
This
is Vi's chapter.
Okay, right. Because I felt it was the one that was the closest to what Giffen would have done himself in terms of that thick black line that he likes to use. Shadowy. We don't ever see Violet. We just see her hands. It's all from her perspective. I really, really just dug that chapter. And then the second one that I liked, oddly enough, was the Ernie Cologne chapter. The Thanagar Chameleon Boy, that thick cross-hatching that he's doing, instead of it being flat black, he's doing like all that hatch work, line work, whatever it's called. Makes it look almost marble or block or rock like. All the characters. I don't know why. I kind of dug it just because it was different.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that I found when reading responses to this annual, is that at least one person that I read hated this because it doesn't fit, because we do have even through the beginning or at the start of the story through the end, you get a lot of just pure blacks on the page, which at that time, and maybe even today still, is unusual, especially in the amount that we see it in this particular issue. And even in the chapter you referenced, chapter 4, there's a large amount of just blackness, which I think works really well.
Well,
for
the page
story.
The background of the page is black, unlike the other. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I mean, they're just really playing with it. So I can see someone going, "Well, this doesn't fit," but like you, I'm like, "Yeah, but this, it calls attention to itself in its difference." What I don't know is there a specific story reason why we would have this? You know, what is it? What does it evoke? What is it meaning to intend to us, impart to us as the reader, by having this art be so much different?
Well, I think just having Keith Giffen as the artist maybe doesn't differentiate it enough. Is that a word? You know what I mean? Like, if it was different artists plus different inkers, I think the chapters really would have felt different, even more different, right? So it is Keith Giffen at the base. So even though the Vi story is kind of more from her perspective, it's the only one that I think artistically he made a conscious effort to do something really different. Otherwise, it's just the inking that's different, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So had it been, we're going to bring in Ernie Colón to do a chapter, we're going to bring in Kurt Swan to do a chapter, then I think, oh boy, we really would have seen a difference. And that's fine, but I think we've seen that before. And I think you and I are probably more forgiving, especially 30 years later, of them just sort of taking chances. I mean, the Legion hasn't been... I guess it still feels comfortable because it is Keith Giffen. So when it is different, I still go, it's still Keith Giffen, though.
Yeah.
It's not like the Joe Orlando issue, which was very different. So I don't know. I liked it. I liked that they just, were willing to take a chance on this issue. I thought, surprisingly, the Mike DiCarlo chapter was fine, because he can be very heavy-handed, as we talked about before. It may not be one of my favorite chapters, but it's like, okay, I dig it. In fact, I think the one that I was like, oh, that actually doesn't work with Giffen's style is the Malstead chapter. I'm actually going to suggest that I think his inking doesn't fit Giffen's artwork at this time. Even though it's very crisp, like we get to that Malstead chapter and boy, Brainy is the line work is super thin. It's not as black oriented as some of the other ones. The shadows or the hair coloring is not as flat black. But I don't know. There was something like, as I was going through it, it kind of felt like he was still trying to ink Giffen when Giffen wasn't in this art style.
Yeah.
So it's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad. It just, I was like, oh, that's okay. That's not, all right. That's fine. It's fine.
Before we move on to something else, real quick, I want to touch on the Ernie Colón art. One reason why I liked it, and this is, I don't know if there's any validity to this other than just my own opinion, but I thought Colón's style here in this chapter was a bit evocative of Joe Kubert's Hawkman. Does that ring a bell with you at all?
Maybe. I'm not as familiar with that. With a lot of Kubert's Hawkman stuff, I haven't read a lot of that, but I can see that. Giving it sort of like an older pulp feel almost. Yeah, kind of, yeah, with a bunch of cross-hatching in it. But yeah, that's one reason why I guess I responded to Colón doing that chapter. But yeah,
there is a page though here that I wanted to call attention to, because this is in chapter 2. This is Mike DiCarlo, and this is on page 9. What happened there? If you look at Devron on page 9, and you compare the Devron on the previous pages, especially on page 7, you get a clear shot of his face there. That looks very different. Do you think, or am I way off base here?
I think it's just because it's softer, because it's less of an action scene, where the other one he's being yanked by Colossal Boy, so
yeah,
the faces are a little more exaggerated.
Okay. Well, it seemed odd that because the inking, it looks a lot lighter on the faces to me, but I wondered, half wondered if somebody else had to do some re-inking on this page for some reason. But you're probably right.
And by the way, we found links. There is an art buyer, an art connoisseur Comics Art Connoisseur, who has almost all the pages of this annual in his collection, I think. I don't think he has the cover. I think that's someone else who has the cover. But there is a guy that we found on Comics Art Fan, or I forget what the website is. We'll put it in the show notes. He has almost full issues of various Legion runs. I was like, wow. Some of it I'm sure was pretty cheap, but other pages I was like, whoa. So he has all this original artwork that you can go in and compare, some of this stuff to the printed page. So I thought that was a nice find to look at. Did you get a chance to look through any of that?
Yeah, well, and speaking specifically of the cover, you did send me a link to someone who has the cover, and it's really interesting to see that cover, which, like I said, is the background is all black, and that page that they show, it's very clearly someone has used a marker or some sort of brush to paint it black, but it's not the pure black that we see on the printed page. So just that contrast of how they process the art for final publication, that's just really interesting to see the difference between the two.
Yeah.
And that's just one little tiny aspect. The other pages I thought were really cool to see in comparison. Looking at original art like that is just really cool.
And I just think it's just interesting that all that information is out there too. You can just punch in Legion of Superheroes original art, and you'll come across something. It's stunning. It's there's a whole subsection of fandom that I certainly never played in because I just don't have the throwaway cash of people who, and I'm not even talking about people who collect like a random page every couple months. These are people who actively go after original art, whether they trade it, whether they buy it. They have checklists. They want to try to get full issues of things. And some of these Legion art collectors, the collection that they have, either it's original art or it's sketches. Oh, it's just amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. Or cover recreations. So good. So awesome.
I forget, Peter, did one of those links that you sent me, did it contain the art for page 25?
I can check.
I don't think so, but because I wanted to talk about that in particular, if you don't mind.
Okay.
It's very simple. This is the beginning of chapter 6. They're back on Earth at the Legion headquarters, and you get the Legion building. It's very clearly the Legion building because you see the L logo in white, but the building itself is all black. But the colors in here, the Carl Gafford color, he must have just went crazy with this because you get all this like night sky, these blues and purples and violets, and it's just this wash of colors that is so unusual for this book, for any Legion issue. I thought that was really neat. And again, they, like I said at the beginning of the show, they were just playing around with this, not only in terms of the kind of story they're telling, but also visually, as we've been talking about. And this is one aspect of that. This was such a striking page. This would be a page I would love to have colored. Original art colored, though.
Yeah, so when you look at the original art, like all the different coloring in the sky, the original art has this separation. So there's stripes across the back of it, but it's in a different color pencil or pen, so that when it goes into the coloring mode, you don't actually see those lines. You just see the difference. Yes. So that's there. Same thing with the backgrounds. And they just reproduce the color in some of the other panels. So yeah, that's there. Curiously enough, let's look at that page. There's a piece of artwork. Yeah, so page 22 that shows Ollie Queen on Brainy's monitor. There's no artwork in the original, on that original page. there's artwork on the left-hand side, but all the right-hand stuff, since they're watching it on a monitor, must have been like an overlay. So that's why they get all those magenta lines, I guess, and the yellow coloring.
Interesting.
But, yeah, on the original art page, it's just the lettering, no artwork, just for all the right-hand side panels. And then they just went in, because I know they should do, Perez did that for Jericho, whenever Jericho would use his power. And you would see all those kind of images that would go off of him as he was entering somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't in the original artwork. He would have to overlay it, so when it prints, it doesn't print black. It prints blue or purple or some other color. So in the original artwork, you don't actually see those images. So that's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll put those links in so people can check those out. All right. You have any quick thoughts here at the end here for anything else that we missed? Or
So I wanted to just touch on some of the specific chapters real quick. So just a couple things I mentioned before. I was going to talk about or mention this in regards to Chameleon Boy on Thanagar. And you talked a little bit about it too, but so he's talking to Science Police Officer, what's his name?
Quiss,
thank you. Yeah, Quiss. And Chameleon Boy makes a reference to Science Police Officer Quiss's writing down of the Legion exploits. And that's where I get the whole Sherlock Holmes thing, because, Quiss is Watson to Cam's Holmes in this way.
Right.
So I thought that was cute. And Quiss mentions how Chameleon Boy has a reputation, or somebody has a reputation for solving crimes. This is on page 10 of panel 2 on page 10. While I've barely finished writing up your brilliant solution to the case of the Imperial Diadem. And I tried looking that up to see if that was a direct reference to something in some past Legion story, and I couldn't find anything. And then on, this is more about the art, but in chapter 4, page 18, there's that scene where Vi is about to get murdered herself because there's a bomb. And I love how they show the explosion at the top of the page, and the background is completely black, like you mentioned. And we get these little decreasingly smaller rectangular panels going down the page, depicting her shrinking, but we don't actually see her, or this is her viewpoint as she's shrinking down to escape the explosion. I thought that was a really cool way to see that. And then on the next page, you see her growing again. You get this a similar increase in the panel size as they move on across the page. I thought that was just really cool.
Yeah, I like that.
This issue, this annual, I found, this is from Comic Vine, the website. This issue was ranked number 92 in Wizard Magazine's list of 100 best single-issue comics since you were born.
Yeah, I saw that too. Between the years of 79 and 2005, yeah.
Yeah. Considering the response to this issue that I read, which, like I said, wasn't very favorable, I find it interesting that it was in the top 100 at that time. I mean, I think it deserves to be there, but,
Sometimes Wizard was all about, hey, we need to sell some back issues or something.
That's true,
so they could have put that in there because of that. But no, I thought that was a fun find. I have one on page 6 in a story that is like kind of validating Easter eggs. We get an Easter egg. The very last panel on page 6, that little orange creature with the big eyes looking up, fairly certain that's Hooka from the Atari Force.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Because Giffen loved that character.
Okay. I always enjoy the crowd scenes that in Legion books, because you never know who's going to appear or who's going to evoke some other character in the way that they're drawing it, because it's just an alien character. But Yeah, I did not pick up on that because, like I said, I didn't read Atari Force, but.
And Giffen wasn't a major player with that title, but he did do at least one backup focusing on that little creature, if not more than that. So when I saw it there, I was like, oh, that's got to be him. It's got to be Hooka.
There's on page 20, this is the scene where Brainiac 5 is showing off how smart he is. And he says, if you're, Laurel says, because she comes back into the story at this point, if you're convinced, Brainy, what are you going to do about it? And he says, stop the next murder, naturally. And you get this little 2-panel comedic scene of, so Cam, Colossal Boy, and Magnetic Kid go, the next murder? And Vai's like, oh, come on. That just made me laugh out loud.
The other thing I have is, I have two other things. Page 25, Laurel says to Devron, you aren't the first science police to have the Legion steal their thunder. That was the thing I was talking about earlier in the episode about, the Legion being a little entitled, being a little nasty to the SPs. So it's nice to see a character actually reference that.
And then, and speaking of that, I think I implied this earlier too, but yeah, on page 30, so this is the scene where the robot is attacking, and there's a lot of things in silhouette. So a lot of black on this page, but which I love. I love that aspect of this particular chapter. But so you see a couple science police officers there, and the robot's going for them. There's some energy stuff going on, and all of a sudden, you see the helmets that the science police officers were wearing. Suddenly, they're flying away and hitting the floor, and you think, "Oh my God, the robot just killed these two officers." But the dialogue box from Violet was really kind of off-putting because she just says, "So much for the science police helping."
Right.
I mean, that's cold. That's cold, Violet.
I do like that this annual does take place right after the Regulus issue that we did in episode 15. So again, even though it's a one-off story, it is in Legion publishing history. They poke fun at Magnetic Kid about being a captive in that issue. So,
Well, and that was also one of the observations, I'll say, of one of the readers back then was, it seems odd that given what's going to happen in issue 16, which I don't know the details of, but I kind of know what it's about, that Brainiac 5 is in the mood that he is in this issue in comparison to what's going on in issue 16 that follows this. So it's this weird, or not weird, but kind of a tight timeline, I guess, is what they were implying.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll see when I get to that issue.
Brady's all over the place.
Yeah.
He's Brady. And then the other thing, I looked up, this is a tangent, but sort of not really. I looked up Professor Ivo. I looked up how to say IVO, right? Because the Wikipedia on him has a strange sort of way to say this is how you pronounce it. Instead of having the letter I with the horizontal line above it, so you say Ivo, right? It has this other way to pronounce it. So I looked up, and in a couple places, IVO is kind of like a shorthand for the French, I think it's French, Yves, like YVES, right? So they were pronouncing it as Evo. Although the cartoons that he's been in or mentioned in, they say Ivo. But then I kind of thought, wait a minute. Evo actually makes sense because that would be a flip of a shorthand for evolution or evolution, right? So, and then especially when you think of the story of trying to murder the Justice League through their own immortality being their lineage, you know? I don't know. There was something about it that I was like, I've always said Professor Ivo, but I kind of like this whole notion that it could be Professor Evo or Evo or something like that. So,
I'll add one more thing. It's at the end there in the epilogue. Brainiac 5, because he talks about how Evo lives on today in cold sleep, hating the descendants of the Justice League anew each time he awakes for a few days. Poor man. And they had this little dialogue back and forth between the characters, kind of explaining, the fact that he's been doing this throughout time. Who knows how many of them he murdered? Cam asks, and then they end the issue basically. But nothing is ever said about what are they going to do about this in the future, because he's still in cold sleep and he wakes up every once. I suppose we're just supposed to infer that when that happens, someone will be there to stop him from doing it again.
Right.
But it's just kind of like one of those loose ends, I guess, that I thought was a bit odd. So not the most satisfactory murder mystery story, but it was an entertaining Legion trying to solve a murder mystery story.
And a perfect example of why these supplemental Tales podcasts work.
Yeah.
Because we can kind of step away from the main narrative. So I mentioned we did get feedback from our first Tales episode featuring the substitute heroes. Chris Bailey, who we've heard from many times, wrote he wrote an email and then read the issue, or listened to our episode and then wrote another email. So there's just a couple of things I want to check on. We do read all of the emails that we get, and we'll try to acknowledge as many as we can. He talked a lot about Giffen's artwork for the subs, especially with certain models like Polar Boy. He says, looking at Keith's design of Polar Boy today, I definitely have an appreciation for exactly what he was going for. I have tried, even as an adult, to mimic Giffen's art style, and it is brutally hard. So there is more to this guy's game than I ever recalled. About the humor, he says, I still laugh. I am in my 40s, and the juvenile humor still makes me laugh. And he's talking about the planet Bismol being a joke on Pepto-Bismol. I may be weird, but this stuff seems to resonate more than it did before my first read 34 plus years ago, which I think is something that we found too.
Yeah, in relation to Giffen's work, he says later, when you think of all the work that Giffen did as a contributor to older Legion books, it's hard to fathom that this is even the same guy who is creating this annual. Such a departure in tone and visuals. Yeah, that's really what that's what I really responded to.
If you got to listen to Giffen do the few interviews that he does, because he is such a curmudgeon nowadays, but he always was a curmudgeon. I think when he was younger, he was a curmudgeon. He was just, someone that just didn't want to take comics seriously while he was taking comics seriously, right? Because it was his profession. It was his job. And he made many mistakes when he was younger. I mean, he freely admits that he aped a lot of Kirby styles and Munez. That's the style that he's going through right now, which was, he freely admits he didn't ape, he stole, from this, I think it was a Latin American artist or South American artist. So, but he has ideas about comics, and boy, when he comes back onto this book, it really elevates it. Even if I'm not the most enamored with an issue or whatever, or an art style, it just makes me pay attention. So I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts for this second supplemental Tales of the Legion Project podcast episode?
I don't think so. I think, I pretty much got everything off my chest, as it were.
Literally and figuratively as you go through allergy season.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I apologize to the listeners. I am suffering from some allergies right now, so hopefully it doesn't annoy people too much. I know Peter's going to do his best to cut some of that stuff out. Anyway.
So, future Tales episodes, we certainly have some obvious things that are coming Pretty close, actually, pretty closely. So around this time, in a couple months, the Legionnaires 3 miniseries will be starting. And what we'll do, I thought, because I kind of gave it I didn't read it, but I gave it a quick look through. I think we can just wait until it's all done in publishing continuity. So we're not going to do like one issue per episode for that. We'll just do a Tales entirely on the 4-issue Legionnaires 3 miniseries.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll be, we got a while yet, a couple more regular episodes yet for that. Oh yeah, so I have here Tales of the Legion, Legionnaires 3, 1 through 4, probably won't fall until around issues 22 or 23. So we have some time for that. And then shortly thereafter is when the Cosmic Boy miniseries starts, so eventually we'll have to do that as well.
Yes.
In the meantime, if something else comes up, I know Eric and I are considering doing, stepping away from Legion and into maybe some current comics. I know Eric really wants to talk about the Quantum Age, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe we'll throw that in sometime this year. That could be fun. And then if anything else shows up, we'll definitely put it into the list.
Good, because I have other things I want to touch on that are Legion adjacent. So, but we'll get to those eventually.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, let's sign off for this episode. If you want to reach us, you can reach me at peter@thedailyrios.com.
And me at longboxreview@gmail.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and we will be back with our regular episodes where we will pick up with Legion of Superheroes issue number 16. So
yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, look for that in the next couple weeks or so after this is released. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.